barn door hung crooked on its hinges, swaying slightly in the evening wind. Gideon Cole stood in the doorway of his ranch house, coffee cup in hand, watching the sun bleed orange across the vast Montana horizon. He'd lived alone for 3 years now, ever since Martha passed away from the fever that had swept through the valley. The silence didn't bother him anymore. It was the creaking, the barn door, the porch boards, the empty rocking chair where she used to sit and watch the sunset, that kept him awake some nights, haunting him with memories of better times. He was about to turn back inside when he heard it. A voice, soft, desperate, barely audible above the wind. "Please, just one night." Gideon froze, cup halfway to his lips. He set it down slowly on the porch rail and squinted toward the barn. The light was fading fast, painting everything in shades of purple and gold, but he could make out a shape near the entrance, small, hunched, trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Just one night in the barn," the voice came again, louder this time, a woman's voice, cracked and weary from exhaustion. "We won't take nothin'. We'll be gone by dawn. I swear it on my mother's grave." Gideon's hand moved instinctively to his belt, where his Colt usually sat, but he'd left it inside on the table, not expecting any visitors this far from town. He walked slowly across the dirt yard, boots crunching on gravel, each step measured and careful. As he got closer, the shape became clearer, and what he saw made his heart tighten. A woman, young, maybe 25, though hardship had carved lines into her face that made her look older. Her dress was torn at the hem, stained with dust and something darker, mud, maybe blood. It was hard to tell in the fading light. Her hair hung loose around her face, tangled and wild, like she'd been running through brush and brambles for days on end. She clutched a bundle to her chest, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that had seen better days. Behind her, pressed against the barn wall like he was trying to disappear into the wood, stood a boy. No older than 7, Gideon reckoned. His eyes were wide, unblinking, like a deer caught in lantern light. Those eyes had seen things no child should ever see. "Ma'am," Gideon said quietly, keeping his distance so as not to spook them. "You lost." The woman's head snapped up. Her face was gaunt, hollowed out by exhaustion and hunger, but it was her eyes that stopped him, cold, dark, sharp, and filled with something Gideon recognized too well from looking in his own mirror. Fear and shame, and a desperate, stubborn will to survive. "We don't mean no harm," she said quickly, her voice cracking like dry timber. "We just need somewhere warm, just tonight, please. We'll sleep in the hay. You won't even know we're here. I can work. I can cook, clean, anything you need. Just please don't send us away." Gideon glanced at the boy. The child hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His clothes were too thin for the cold nights this high in the mountains, where frost could kill a man as surely as any bullet. His hands were red and raw, chapped from the cold. His feet were wrapped in rags instead of proper boots. "Where's your husband?" Gideon asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. The woman's jaw tightened. "Ain't got one." "Where you comin' from?" She hesitated, her grip on the bundle tightening until her knuckles went white. "South. We've been walkin' for near 2 weeks, maybe longer. I lost count of the days." Gideon studied her face. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at the edges of his memory like a half-forgotten dream, but he couldn't place it. He looked past her, toward the road that wound down the mountain toward civilization. No wagon, no horse, no supplies, just 2 people alone, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the fear in their eyes. "You runnin' from something?" he asked. Her eyes flicked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Ain't everybody?" Gideon nodded slowly. He understood that answer better than most. He'd been running from his own demons for years, trying to outpace guilt and regret that followed him like shadows. He looked at the boy again. The child's lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. His face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. He looked like a ghost, barely tethered to this world. "Barn's got holes in the roof," Gideon said, his voice rough. "Gets cold at night. Wind cuts right through like a knife. Rain comes in something fierce." The woman's face fell. She nodded, swallowing hard, already preparing herself for rejection. "I understand. We'll move on. Thank you for your time." "I wasn't finished," Gideon interrupted, and something in his tone made her freeze. He nodded toward the house, where lamplight was beginning to glow warm in the windows. "Got a spare room. Used to be my daughter's, before she grew up and moved east to marry a banker. beds still made, clean sheets and everything. The woman stared at him, her mouth opening slightly in disbelief. We can't. You can, Gideon said firmly, and you will. I ain't talking no for an answer. Come on before the cold sets in proper. He turned and started walking back toward the house, not looking to see if she followed. For a moment, there was only silence behind him, the wind, the creaking barn door, the distant call of a night owl. Then, slowly, he heard footsteps. The woman had taken the boy's hand and was following him toward the house, toward warmth and safety and a chance to rest. Inside, Gideon lit the oil lamps one by one and stirred the fire in the hearth until it crackled and blazed with welcoming heat. The woman stood near the door, still clutching the bundle to her chest, as if waiting for him to change his mind and cast them back into the darkness. The boy pressed himself against her side, silent as a shadow, watching everything with those two old eyes. Sit, Gideon said, gesturing to the sturdy wooden table. I'll heat some stew, made it fresh yesterday, venison and potatoes should still be good. The woman didn't sit. She just stood there, trembling despite the warmth of the fire. Gideon could see it now in the lamplight, the bruises on her wrists, faint but unmistakable, the kind that came from being grabbed hard by cruel hands, the way she flinched when he moved too quickly, like she was expecting a blow. He set the pot on the stove and turned to face her, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. You're safe here, he said, and meant every word. Whatever you're running from, it ain't getting through that door tonight, not while I'm breathin'. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the fierce pride of someone who'd learned that crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Why, she whispered, why would you help us? You don't know us from Adam. Gideon didn't answer right away. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and set them on the table with 2 hunks of fresh bread. Because somebody should have helped me once, he said quietly, staring at the steam rising from the bowls. And they didn't. I ain't gonna make that same mistake twice. The woman finally sat, lowering herself into the chair like her legs might give out at any moment. The boy climbed into the chair beside her, his small hands reaching for the bowl with desperate hunger. He ate in silence, mechanically, shoving food into his mouth as if he'd forgotten what hunger felt like and was only now remembering. Gideon watched them for a moment, something twisting in his chest. Then he turned away, not wanting them to see the emotion on his face. He poured himself a cup of strong black coffee and stood by the window, staring out into the gathering darkness. He didn't ask her name, not yet. He'd learned a long time ago that some people needed time before they could speak their truths. Pushing too hard only made them clam up tighter. But as he stood there, watching the firelight flicker across the woman's face, something nagged at him like a splinter under the skin. The curve of her jaw, the way she held herself, even in exhaustion, proud, defiant, unbowed despite everything she'd clearly suffered. He'd seen that face before. And when the memory finally surfaced, hours later as he lay in his own bed, listening to the wind howl through the valley, his blood ran cold. He knew exactly who she was. And he knew why she was running. Gideon didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling, the woman's face burning in his mind like a brand. It had taken him hours to place her, but once he did, the memory came flooding back with the force of a river breaking through ice in spring. 8 years ago, a town called Redemption Falls, 2 days south through the mountain passes. He'd been younger then, still trying to make a name for himself as a ranch hand, still believing that hard work and honest living would lead to a good life. He'd been working for a man named Holloway, a landowner with more ambition than conscience, more greed than humanity. And the woman sleeping in his daughter's room, her name was Eliza Brennan. Her father had owned a small homestead just outside Redemption Falls. Good land, the best in the valley, with water rights to the creek that fed half the county. Holloway had wanted it. Badly. He'd made offers, then threats, then promises of what would happen if Samuel Brennan didn't sell. But Samuel Brennan was a stubborn man, proud of the land his grandfather had settled, and he wouldn't budge for any amount of money or intimidation. So Holloway had done what men like him always did. He'd found a reason to take what he wanted by force. Gideon remembered the night it happened, every detail seared into his memory like a hot iron on flesh. Holloway had called it a legal seizure, said Brennan owed debts he couldn't pay, said the land was forfeit under some obscure territorial law that probably didn't exist. But Gideon had been there when Holloway's men rode out that night. He'd seen the torches blazing against the darkness, heard the screams echoing across the valley. He'd been 19 years old, too young to stand up to Holloway and his army of hired guns, too scared to lose his job, his livelihood, maybe his life. So he'd stayed silent. He'd watched from a distance as the flames climbed into the night sky. He'd done nothing. And Samuel Brennan had burned with his house, crying out for mercy that never came. Eliza had been 17 then. Gideon remembered seeing her the next day, standing in the ashes of everything she'd ever known, her face blank with shock. She'd been taken in by an uncle somewhere south, or so he'd heard from the whispers around town. He hadn't thought about her since, or rather, he'd tried not to think about her, about any of it, burying the guilt deep where he hoped it would stay. Until tonight. When dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Gideon rose and made breakfast. Bacon, eggs, fresh biscuits, strong coffee. He set the table quietly, trying to keep his hands steady despite the turmoil in his mind. When Eliza emerged from the bedroom, the boy trailing behind her like a shadow, she looked rested but wary, like a wild animal not yet sure if the trap had truly been sprung. "Mornin'," Gideon said, keeping his voice neutral. "Mornin'," she replied. Her voice was softer now, less desperate, but still guarded. She glanced at the food, then at him. "You didn't have to do all this." "Eat," Gideon said. "We'll talk after." They ate in silence. The boy, Gideon still didn't know his name, devoured his food with the same mechanical intensity as the night before, like a little machine designed only for survival. Eliza ate slowly, carefully, savoring each bite as if it might be her last. When they finished, Gideon poured more coffee and sat across from her. He folded his hands on the table and met her eyes directly. "Your name's Eliza Brennan," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Her face went pale as fresh snow. The boy looked up, alarmed by the sudden tension in the room. "How do you?" she started, but Gideon raised a hand. "I was there," he said. "Redemption Falls, 8 years ago, I worked for Holloway." Eliza's expression shifted, shock, then recognition, then something darker and more dangerous. Anger, pure, righteous fury. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor like a scream. "You worked for him." "I did," Gideon said. He didn't look away, didn't try to hide from her accusation. "I was 19, needed the work to survive. I didn't know what he was planning until it was too late, until the flames were already climbing." "You didn't know?" Eliza's voice was shaking now, trembling with years of suppressed rage. "You were there, you saw what he did, you saw my father." "I did," Gideon said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, glistening with unshed tears. "And I did nothing. God help me, I did nothing." Eliza stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The boy tugged at her sleeve, frightened by this sudden transformation, but she didn't move. "Why didn't you stop him?" she whispered. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" "Because I was a coward," Gideon said simply. "I told myself I couldn't do nothing, that it wasn't my fight, that I'd lose my job, maybe my life. I told myself a lot of things to help me sleep at night. None of them were true. They were just excuses, and poor ones at that." Eliza's hands clenched into fists. "And now, why'd you help us now, to ease your guilty conscience?" Gideon looked down at his coffee, watching the steam curl upward. "Because I've spent 8 years trying to forget what I saw, and I can't. I see your father's face every time I close my eyes. I hear him shouting your name while the flames—" He stopped, his voice cracking like old wood. "I should have done something, anything, and I didn't. That's a sin I'll carry to my grave." Eliza was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold as mountain ice. "You think feeding us breakfast makes it right? You think a warm bed washes away blood?" "No," Gideon said. "Nothing makes it right. Nothing ever could. But I ain't letting you walk out that door with nowhere to go. Not this time. Not when I can finally do something that matters." "Why?" Eliza demanded. "So you can feel better about yourself, so you can sleep at night." "No," Gideon said. He finally looked up at her, and she saw the depth of his anguish, the years of self-loathing carved into every line of his face. because you shouldn't have to run anymore, and because I owe your father a debt I can't ever repay, but I can start with you. I can start today." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. She turned away, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. The boy stood and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she pulled him close, burying her face in his hair. "Who's after you?" Gideon asked quiet. "Lie." Eliza wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "His name's Dalton, Sheriff Dalton, from Redemption Falls." Gideon's jaw tightened. He knew the name all too well. Dalton had been Holloway's right hand, his enforcer, the man who'd signed the papers that made the theft legal and the murder clean. "Why's he after you?" "Because I testified," Eliza said bitterly. "2 months ago, a federal marshal came through, started asking questions about land seizures during the war. I told him everything, about Holloway, about Dalton, about all of it." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Thought the law would finally do something, thought justice might actually mean something. Instead, Dalton came for me, said if I didn't leave town, I'd disappear just like my father, so I ran. Gideon stood slowly, and the boy. "My son," Eliza said. "His name's Samuel, after my father." Gideon looked at the boy, Samuel, and felt something twist in his chest. The child stared back at him with his mother's eyes, dark and wary and far too old. "You can stay," Gideon said, "long as you need, forever if that's what it takes." "Dalton will come," Eliza said. "He won't stop, he can't afford to, if I talk to that marshal again." "Then we'll be ready," Gideon said. Eliza shook her head. "You don't understand. He's got men, 12 guns or more, the law's on his side, you can't." "I couldn't do nothing 8 years ago," Gideon interrupted, "but I can do something now, and I will." 3 days passed in uneasy peace. Gideon worked the ranch, mending fences and tending cattle, while Eliza and Samuel stayed close to the house. She didn't trust him, not fully, maybe not ever, but she didn't leave either. Samuel followed Gideon around like a shadow, silent but curious, watching everything with those observant eyes. On the 4th morning, Gideon woke to the sound of hoofbeats echoing across the valley. He was dressed and armed before the sun crested the ridge. He stepped onto the porch and saw them, 4 riders, moving slow and deliberate up the road like they owned it. They stopped at the edge of his property, just beyond the fence line. Gideon recognized the man in front immediately. Sheriff Dalton. He was older now, grayer, heavier, but still carried himself with the same arrogant ease of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. He wore a tin star on his chest and a Colt on his hip. The 3 men behind him were hired guns, lean, hard-eyed killers who made their living with violence. Dalton dismounted and walked to the fence. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Gideon Cole," he called. "Been a long time." Gideon didn't move from the porch, not long enough. Dalton chuckled. "Heard you were living out here, quiet life, good land." He glanced at the house. "You alone." "That's my business." "Not if you're harboring a fugitive," Dalton said, his smile fading. "I'm looking for a woman, Eliza Brennan. She's wanted for questioning in connection with some legal matters. You seen her?" "No," Gideon said flatly. Dalton's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Dalton studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Well, if you do see her, I'd appreciate it if you let me know. She's a dangerous woman, likes to spread lies about good men who are just trying to do their jobs." "Good men," Gideon repeated, "like you." Dalton's jaw tightened. "Careful, Cole, you don't want to make an enemy of the law." "The law," Gideon said. "Is that what you're calling it now?" One of the hired guns shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his weapon. Dalton raised a hand, stopping him. "You've always been a smart man, Cole," Dalton said. "Don't do something stupid now." "I could say the same to you." Dalton stared at him, his smile completely gone. "We'll be watching. If she shows up, I'll know. And if you're hitting her," he let the threat hang in the air like smoke, "well, we'll have to come back, and next time we won't be so polite." He turned and mounted his horse. The 4 riders wheeled around and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Gideon waited until they disappeared over the ridge before he stepped off the porch. His hands were shaking. Eliza appeared in the doorway, Samuel clutching her hand. Her face was white as bone. "He knows," she whispered. "Maybe," Gideon said, "but he ain't got proof, not yet." "He doesn't need proof," Eliza said. "He's the law, he can do whatever he wants." Gideon looked at her. "Not here, not on my land." That night, Gideon sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap. He didn't sleep. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the scent of rain and something darker. In the distance, he thought he saw campfire smoke rising against the stars. They were out there, watching, waiting. Dalton came back 2 days later. This time, there were 8 men. Gideon saw them from the porch, a line of riders moving through the rain like death itself. He stood and picked up his rifle. Eliza appeared in the doorway, Samuel behind her. "Get inside," Gideon said. "Lock the door, don't come out no matter what." "Gideon!" "Go," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. She pulled Samuel inside and shut the door. Gideon heard the bolt slide into place. He stepped off the porch and walked to the fence line. Dalton dismounted, flanked by his men. They spread out, forming a half-circle around the property. "Last chance, Cole," Dalton called. "Hand her over and we'll leave peaceable." "No." Dalton sighed. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." Dalton nodded to his men. They began to move forward. Gideon raised his rifle. And then, from behind him, he heard hoofbeats. He turned. Coming up the road from the east were more riders, 12, maybe 15. At first, Gideon thought they were more of Dalton's men, reinforcements come to finish the job. But as they got closer, he recognized them. Old ranch hands, men he'd worked beside for years, neighbors from down the valley, men who'd heard what was happening and decided they'd seen enough injustice for one lifetime. The lead rider was a man named Eli Boone, a grizzled cattleman with a white beard and a Winchester across his saddle. He reined his horse to a stop beside Gideon and nodded. "Heard you might need a hand," Eli said. Gideon stared at him. "Eli." "Don't," Eli said. "We ain't here to talk, we are here to stand." The other riders spread out, forming a line beside Gideon. Dalton's men hesitated, their hands hovering near their guns. Dalton's face darkened. "You're interfering with the law." "The law," Eli said, "is supposed to protect people, not hunt them down like animals." "She's a fugitive," Dalton snapped. "She's a woman who told the truth," Eli shot back, "and you're a coward who hides behind a tin star." Dalton's hand moved toward his gun, but Eli was faster. He leveled his Winchester at Dalton's chest. "Don't," Eli said quietly. "We ain't gonna let you take her, and if you try, you'll have to go through all of us." For a long moment, no one moved. The rain pounded down, turning the ground to mud. Dalton looked at his men, then at the line of rifles pointed at him. Finally, he stepped back. "This ain't over," he said. "Yeah," Eli said, "it is." Dalton mounted his horse and rode off, his men following. The valley fell silent except for the sound of rain. Gideon turned to Eli, his throat tight. "Why?" "Because we're tired," Eli said. "Tired of men like him thinking they can do whatever they want. Tired of standing by and doing nothing." He looked at Gideon. "Same as you." Weeks turned into months. Eliza and Samuel stayed. Gideon taught the boy to ride, to mend fences, to read the sky for weather. Eliza planted a garden and cooked meals that filled the house with warmth and laughter. The federal marshal came through eventually. Eliza testified again. This time, Dalton didn't run. He couldn't. Too many people had seen, too many people had spoken up. Justice came slow, but it came. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, Gideon and Eliza stood by the fence line. Samuel ran through the grass, chasing fireflies. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," Eliza said quietly. "You are," Gideon said. "I promise." She looked at him. "You think we can stay, for good?" Gideon smiled. "I'd like that." She took his hand and squeezed it. In the distance, Samuel laughed, a sound Gideon hadn't heard before. It was light, free, unbroken by fear. And for the first time in 8 years, Gideon felt like he could breathe. The ghosts were still there, they always would be. But they didn't own him anymore.